Good evening. How are you guys doing? I just want to make sure that my sound is working good, so bear with me for just a second. Cool. Now I can mute that out. Sorry about that. So I hope everybody's having a wonderful night. I got this cool little mic stand, and just because my microphone was so far away, I felt like I was practically yelling all the time just to make my voice heard. Not that that's a bad thing, but sometimes you just want to be nice and chill. So tonight, I'm going to do it nice and chill if I possibly can get away with it. So I had pulled up the to do the Munk debates. I thought that it would be really interesting to go over those tonight. I know that there's a lot of other stuff that's going on, but tonight I just figured Munk debates might be something interesting to see, because we saw all the fallout from the Twitter files 1, 2, part 20, whatever. I don't know. I lost track after like 10. It's basically just giving confirmation to things that everybody already knew about. And I just felt that there was enough people covering that I didn't find my input any much different than what everybody else was saying in regards to all that. So I just thought it would be better to not even continue on with it unless they came out with something that was new and breaking and that I didn't already know, or the rest of the world already know. It's nice to have a mute button where I can see it, so then I can turn it off whenever I have to cough. Good stuff. Well, let's see what we've got here. Some Munk debates. It's not showing in this. I know why. Because I'm a silly fool. So I had it queued up, and then of course I didn't have it queued up. So let me find it real quick here. Okay. 27 seconds. Copy. Paste and go. Nope. That is 2 minutes 20. 50. There we go. 2 minutes and 27 seconds in. I think I can just close this out there and then pull it up here. Yeah, this is what happens whenever you are running a little bit late. Tend to like totally boink it. Sorry about that. Let me see if I've got it here. That one, share. Beautiful. So here we go with a long Munk debate. Let's see how it turns out. Should be quite interesting. Let's pull it up, and we will pull it up on full screen. And maybe I will, because I think it's more interesting, the actual interaction between, and I've already seen this Munk debate, but I thought I would discuss some of my views on this. I suppose there were parts that were a little bit frustrating. So here we go.
Welcome to the Munk debates. Woo!
And I will be, commenting on it as to try to avoid getting some sort of copyright strike here. This is fair use, YouTube. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. And like I said, fair use. So enjoy.
This is our 28th debate in this series. 28 debates.
That's pretty
Wow.
good.
Many of you, I know, have been with us since that very first debate at the Royal Ontario Museum. And I got to say, coming back from this pandemic, to finally be here at Roy Thomson Hall with a full house, not a single ticket unsold, is a big credit to all of you. So thank you so much for your support for more and better public debate. We could not do this without you, and I'm so glad to have all these students on our stage tonight. Thank you, guys. You're in for a real treat.
All right. Blah, blah.
Onto this stage, four remarkable debaters.
Okay. I love it whenever it blocks
For
up.
the last 28 debates, convened us here at Roy Thomson Hall and other locations across the GTA to have these conversations. So a big thank you to the Munk family and the Peter and Melanie Munk Foundation for hosting us this evening. Thank you guys for once again supporting this debate series. So that time has come. Let's get our debaters out here center stage debating our resolution, be it resolved, don't trust mainstream media. Arguing for the resolution is a veteran journalist, widely published author, Substack sensation, the new publishing platform that's sweeping a lot of media right now. Please give a warm Toronto welcome to Matt Taibbi.
There we go. Sorry about that. So is it Matt Taibbi or it Matt Taibbi? I don't know.
Thank you. Well, Matt's debating partner tonight comes here directly from the front lines of the Russia-Ukraine war that he was covering for The Spectator magazine, where he is associate editor. He too is an acclaimed author, debater, and media commentator in the United Kingdom and America. Please welcome Douglas Murray.
Now, if you haven't seen any of what Douglas Murray does, he's quite prominent and an excellent debater. He's got some pretty good insight. I don't agree with a lot of his views, but in this one, I think he makes it very clear about a lot of things.
Thank you, Douglas. Yeah, thanks for doing that. Well, one great team of debaters deserves another, and here we do not disappoint. Arguing against our motion, don't trust mainstream media, is celebrated New York Times columnist, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, former Munk debater, Michelle Goldberg.
I don't know much about Michelle Goldberg, but apparently she debates really well.
Hey, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Get up there right there. Michelle's debating partner is a Canadian journalist. Yes, I will claim him as one of our own. A veteran New Yorker staff writer, a podcasting sensation who doesn't love revisionist history, and an internationally acclaimed author. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm Gladwell.
I don't know who this guy is either. Apparently he's somebody, but I don't know who he is.
Thanks, Malcolm. This will be fun. Okay, we're always innovating here and experimenting at the Munk Debates with our polling system. So what we did tonight is we polled all of you before you arrived. You hopefully got an email, or on the way in you saw your...
So girl all the way to the right, she reminds me of that Saturday Night Live skit. She reminds me of the girl from that. That's who she looks like. I can't remember her name off the top of my head.
Program or the prompts on the screen. So we've got a whole bunch of people who participated in a poll on our motion tonight, do not trust mainstream media. So let's get those results up on the screen to give us a sense of where public opinion is in.
Okay, so be it resolved, don't trust the mainstream media. Pro, con. So let's find out what they mean by this.
In this hall right now, we have a divided debate, 48 to 52. So an audience that is hanging in the balance here, hinged on this resolution, impaled on the horns of a dilemma. I love it.
What a wordsmith. So special.
What we're going to do is open up a second question for you now, because we want to know, are you open to changing your mind over the course of what you're going to hear in the next 90 minutes?
Okay, so I don't know if we need to have these questions. I guess for the people in the crowd that might be important. For me, it's not really that important. But we shall see if these debaters can change my mind. They're going up against Matt Taibbi on the left side, with Douglas Murray against two people, the underdogs.
Can you be persuaded to move from the pro camp into the con camp, or vice versa? So to take part in that poll, if you haven't already logged on.
So I'm assuming on the pro camp, that would be Douglas Murray, Matt Taibbi. On the con camp, it would be the Malcolm Gladwell and Michelle.
Simply text message the word Munk, M-U-N-K, not M-O-N-K, to 37607. So I'll give people a moment to do that. Again, to text the word Munk to 37607, and you'll get the question sent to your phone by text message for you to reply to. And as we tabulate those results, I just want to remind our debaters in the audience about our countdown clock, because this is a critical way that we're going to keep this debate on time and our debaters on their toes. So for each of the sections of the debate, you'll see a clock that will appear on the screen for the final moments of that presenter's section. I ask that you start applauding when the clock hits 0, okay? Let's be a little bit generous here. Wait till the clock counts down to 0, and then give them a loud round of applause, and that will move us through our evening. So let's see if we've got some results now from our second audience vote on how many of you would change your mind depending on what you hear tonight. So we'll see if we can get those results up on the big screen. Give them a moment here. If not, right now, we'll bring them to you as soon as they are available. There you are, 82%.
Oh, look at that. 82% are open to changing their mind, and there's 18% that are steadfast in their beliefs. Nothing you say can change my mind.
Could change your mind, 18%. You're committed. Let's see just how committed you are, but this debate is very much in play. So I appreciate everyone voting, and again, we'll have a running poll throughout the evening, so keep an eye.
Don't run with polls. You could put someone's eye out.
For text prompts and results on the monitors at the front of the page. Okay, let's go to opening statements. The debaters in advance have agreed on the speaking order, and it gives me great pleasure to ask Matt Taibbi to kick off our debate with our opening statement. Matt, over to you.
I've never heard Matt speak except for in this debate.
Be it resolved, don't trust mainstream media. My name is Matt Taibbi. I've been a reporter for 30 years, and I argue for the resolution. You should not trust mainstream media. I grew up in the press. My father was a reporter. My stepmother was a reporter. My godparents were reporters. Basically every adult I knew growing up was a reporter. So I actually love the news business, but I mourn for it. It's destroyed itself by getting away from its basic function, which is just to tell us what's happening.
There you go. That's a salvo right there that he just threw out. He did not mince words. He just said it straightforward. It is not what it used to be, which was just to tell us what was happening.
My father had a saying, "The story's the boss." In the American context, this means that if the facts tell you the Republicans were the villains in a political disaster, then you write it that way. If the facts point more at the Democrats, you write that. If they're both culpable, as was often the case for me when I investigated Wall Street for almost 10 years after the 2008 crash.
Ooh. Ha. That everybody was involved in that one.
You write the story that way. We're not supposed to thumb the scale. Our job is just to call things as we see them and leave the rest up to you. But we don't do that now. The story is no longer the boss. Instead, we sell narrative in a dysfunctional new business model.
Yes.
Once the commercial strategy of the news business was to go for the whole audience. A TV news broadcast was aired at dinner time, and it was designed to be watched by the entire family. Everyone from your crazy right-wing uncle to the sulking lefty teenager in the corner. This system had flaws, but making an effort to talk to everybody had benefits. For one thing, it inspired trust. Gallup polls twice showed Walter Cronkite to be the most trusted person in all of America.
Wow. That's pretty impressive, considering Walter Cronkite went through many presidents, and that's pretty good.
That would never happen with a newsreader today. With the arrival of the internet, some outlets found that instead of going after the whole audience, it made more financial sense to pick one demographic and try to dominate it. How do you do that? That's easy. You just pick an audience and feed it news you know they'll like.
There you go.
Instead of starting with a story and following the facts, you start with what pleases your audience and work backward to the story.
And that's not a good way to run a news organization. And if you want to run a talk show or something that's got a little bit more pizzazz to it, then I understand. You want to have, your CNN 24/7 news that basically reports the same thing about the same person for 24 hours straight. I'm looking at you, CNN, about Donald Trump, because that went on for 4 years. And whenever Trump was there no more, you started firing people because they couldn't produce any news.
This process started with Fox, but really now everybody does it.
Yes.
From CNN to OAN to the Washington Post, nearly all media organizations are in the same demographic hunting business. According to a Pew Center survey from a few years ago, 93% of Fox's audience votes Republican. In an exactly mirroring phenomenon, 95% of the MSNBC audience votes Democratic. The New York Times readers are 91% Democrats. Left or right, most commercial audiences in America, anyway, are politically homogenous.
Mm-hmm.
This bifurcated system is fundamentally untrustworthy.
Yes, this is why I very seldom watch the news. The only time that I pull up any sort of news stories is whenever I've seen something that might be trending on Twitter or some other platform. Maybe it comes popping up on my news feed, and then I dig into it to see a little bit more about it, to see if it's even worth following.
When you decide in advance to forego half of your potential audience to cater to the other half, you're choosing in advance which facts to emphasize and which to downplay, based on considerations other than truth or newsworthiness. This is not journalism. This is political entertainment.
Yes, that's what news has become. Political entertainment. Give me the facts, ma'am. Just the facts.
And it's therefore fundamentally unreliable. With editors now more concerned with retaining audience than getting things right, lots of guardrails have been thrown out.
Yes.
Silent edits have become common.
Mm-hmm.
Serious accusations are made without calling people for comment. Reporters get too cozy with politicians and report things either without attribution
Yep.
or sourced to unnamed people familiar with the matter. Like scientists, journalists should be able to reproduce each other's work in the lab. With too many anonymous sources, this is impossible. We just get a lot of stuff wrong now. In the Trump years, an extraordinary number of quote-unquote bombshells went sideways. From the P-tape to the Alpha server story to speculation that Trump was a Russian spy recruit.
He's calling him out right now. That's pretty good.
Recruited before disco started, to false reports of Russians hacking a Vermont utility. We've accumulated piles of these wrong stories.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I wrote a book about the guy called Insane Clown President.
That he did. He is not a fan.
But these stories offend me. A good journalist should always be ashamed of error, and it bothers me to see so many of my colleagues not ashamed. News media shouldn't have a side. It should focus on getting things right, which, believe me, is a hard enough job. Until we get back to the basics, we don't deserve to be trusted, and we won't be. Thank you very much.
Damn, that was a hell of an opening salvo. I'm quite impressed with that. Short, sweet, and to the point. Matt Taibbi. Sounds a little nervous, but I think he's got it.
Well done, Matt. 39 seconds on the clock, so you were saved from the dreaded applause. But we appreciate that opening statement. Now we're going to hear from the con side. Michelle, you're up.
Hi there. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to try not to make this argument too America-centric, which I know can happen with American journalists. But I do want to start by talking about an election that we just had in America, and some of the things that the media got wrong in the run-up to that election.
Like just about everything. Their polls are wrong. Their reporting on Donald Trump was wrong. All of the major news outlets were wrong.
There was an article on CNN, why the midterms are going to be great for Donald Trump. Politico commissioned a poll. The poll came back showing that more people intended to vote for Democrats than Republicans. Politico then wrote a story about how Democrats were about to get trounced and dismissed its own poll as an outlier.
Yes, because they don't have any sources. Pollsters are all liars.
I bought into the red wave narrative because it was what the pollsters were saying.
That's not what they were saying. Pollsters weren't saying anything about a red wave. Pollsters were saying that the Democrats were going to bring in a blue wave. It depended on who you were actually watching. If you were watching both sides, nobody knew.
Seemed to be what the people who I thought knew what they were doing were saying.
And see, pollsters are not news.
So I'm not standing up here and arguing that the media never gets anything wrong, and that the media is full of human beings who are subject to all of the frailties that human beings are subject to.
That's why there's checks and balances. I mean, truth be told, this would be considered media. And I guess it would be mass media because I can hit a massive audience. But she fails to say this.
Right? The media can be subject to groupthink. It can be subject to fads. Absolutely. What I want to...
No. True news should never be subject to fads. It should be never subject to any of that. It should be plain and simple. Report the news. That's it. That's all we need to hear is just the news.
Argue is that the media doesn't get things wrong because of ideological capture. It certainly didn't help the Democrats when the New York Times was reporting again and again that that Republicans were going to sweep. And in fact,
actually, it would do the opposite. If they were thinking that the Republicans were going to sweep, it would probably bring people out in a higher group to actually vote.
in fact, it affected people's donation decisions. It affected their volunteering decisions. A lot of people would have allocated a lot of resources differently if they had any idea that some of these races would be as close as they were.
And this is why you shouldn't donate to those politicians unless you truly believe in what they're doing.
The media...
The problem is they're saying that you need to basically vote for these people because your donations are the only thing that's going to make them do really well. But they're getting big donations from big dollars, and this never gets reported on unless they're actually caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Think about how much the GOP raised. Think about how much the RNC raised. They raised a lot of money. DNC, RNC, tons. And then they've got all these PACs and super PACs. And oh yeah, it goes insane around every election.
Tends to overcorrect. It tends to respond to the mistakes that it made. And this can result in new mistakes, but it also means that it is a mechanism that is inherently self-correcting. I think that when you say, you know, can we trust the mainstream media?
Absolutely. If they reported just the news. I don't need to know. I don't need to get my news from Twitter. I shouldn't be getting my news from Twitter.
Obviously, you should seek out lots of sources, right? People should read Matt's blog, they should read conservative media, they should read liberal media. But think about the big stories of the last 5 years or so, you know, from...
But were they really actually big stories? Or could they have just been left on the cutting room floor? Because if you notice, whenever she mentions big stories, all those big stories are going to be something that happened overseas. Like what happens in another country is more important than what happens in the United States, especially something that does not actually affect the United States.
The Trump presidency to COVID to the...
And COVID was misreported from everything that I've seen quite a bit.
war in Ukraine.
And I said, as I said,
Now, if you had just followed the CBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC,
you would have been completely and utterly astounded of how much unfactual news they were reporting.
they all got some things wrong, you know.
But that's the point. You're not supposed to be getting some things wrong. You're supposed to be just reporting the facts.
I think a lot of the media didn't pay enough attention, for example, to the problems of quote unquote, I say this as someone with young children, remote learning.
Because it was buried under January 6th hearing, under January 6th committees. That's what that stuff was buried under. Stuff was buried under COVID. Because they would run 300 stories a day about all the deaths that were happening. They had a constant ticker on everything, talking about the jabs, And how many people have deceased?
I think we got a lot of things wrong during
Yeah, she went from some things to a lot.
COVID. But in terms of the big stories, if you paid attention to the mainstream media, you were likely to be much safer and much closer to the truth
No.
than if you followed the kind of contrarians, if you followed the people who were saying, don't trust the mainstream.
No. She's missing the point.
Media, trust these alternative
And Matt Taibbi has got her like dead to rights on this. He could chew her up and spit her out on just her opening.
sources of information. You know, if you were saying that, for example, it was a common refrain, I think one that Matt made again and again throughout the Trump presidency, that people who were extremely alarmed about the prospects of authoritarianism, that people who believed that Donald Trump would try to overturn our constitutional order were hysterical.
They were.
I think that the point of view of the hysterics is actually held up kind of well in light of January 6th.
Wait until it all washes out there, sweet cheeks.
COVID, we got things, the journalists were following experts who were facing a once-in-a-century pandemic, and official guidance kept changing. So you heard different things about masks, you heard different things about whether or not the vaccines really prevented transmission, you heard different things about whether the J&J vaccine...
So she's basically given a rundown of all the different news stories that everybody was getting wrong, that were confusing people, because they were not reporting the news. They were shilling their news out to other people. They were getting their news from something that could not be verified, and the people that were verifying were the people that could have verified what you were learning was true. They were shut down from speaking out, or they were called dissenters, or they were called terrorists, or they were called violent extremists. All of those words were being thrown out there constantly, because for the media to have a good story, they need to have division. Instead of the news stations reporting the news of what was actually happening. They'll get to it, I'm sure.
Was as good as the mRNA vaccines. However, if you followed the mainstream media, you knew that COVID, pretty early, you knew that COVID was airborne. You knew that it was more serious than the flu. And you knew that the vaccines were likely to protect you.
I want to say it so bad, but I don't want to lose my channel.
The COVID contrarians, the contrarian media, the one who were saying not to trust.
If I remember this correctly, now I could be wrong, but it was while Trump was president, they were immediately saying don't trust the vaccine. And I'm pretty positive that our current vice president was one that was very much anti-vax. Now, you can check for me, but I'm pretty positive that she was the one that was saying that she wouldn't get vaccinated until all these other people were in the office. And as soon as they became in there, it became their top priority to make sure that everybody was locked up, jabbed up, and jabbed up, and jabbed up, and jabbed up.
Kind of mainstream sources of opinion were saying this is just another flu. Deaths are going to be 6,000. The media.
And also on the other side, you had people that whenever Trump was president, they were all for getting the vaccination, and as soon as he was not president, they were on the other side of it, saying that they would not get it. So Trump was in there, they wanted to get it. Whenever Trump wasn't in there, they didn't want to get it. It matters not to me whether you did or not. But do you feel good about your decision? If you do, then stand by it and be happy. But you shouldn't be degrading people because of their decision, is my point. If someone does not want to get it, then they don't want to get it. They won't do it. Leave it at that. Why would you force somebody to do something they don't want to do?
Media doesn't want to tell you, I mean, Matt wrote this several times, the media doesn't want to tell you about ivermectin.
Which that right there would have got you yeeted off of YouTube if you would have discussed that, 6 months ago? A year?
Similarly, with Ukraine, there was in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine.
Which one? Is she talking about the invasion in the 90s? In the 2000s? Which one is she talking about? Which invasion on Ukraine?
Again, I think Matt said that the media is overhyping this, that people are kind of taking stenography from the Biden administration, that Russia actually is probably not going to invade. And then when it did invade, what you've heard from a lot of kind of...
And how does an invasion in Ukraine affect the United States? Except we're sending them a bunch of money.
People who reflexively distrust the media is that the media is being too triumphalist.
Oh, big word for a little girl.
They won't admit that Russia's doing much better than they say.
Would they?
They pretending that that the Ukrainians have more of a chance.
And the look on Matt Taibbi's face is priceless right here, because he's going, I can't believe the rambling that this person is doing. It is word salad.
Than they did. And again, I would just say that I think that the mainstream media has gotten the big things right. And so while mainstream journalism, there's a lot you can say against it. I would, just to paraphrase Churchill,
Don't paraphrase Churchill. You are an idiot, woman.
It is the worst system in the world except for all of the others. Thank you.
Horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was not a good opening at all. She is about to get pummeled. Probably in the worst way.
Thank you, Michelle, for that terrific opening statement. We're now going to turn it over to Douglas for the next pro opening statement. Douglas, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Rudyard. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. As Rudyard said, I've come a rather long way from the front lines of the Ukraine conflict because I like to see these things with my own eyes.
Oh. Poor little Michelle. You were about to get pummeled horribly.
Myself and to come to my own conclusions. I came out through Moldova the other day, through London, then got to Toronto, and a friend of mine said, why are you going to Toronto? I said, an invitation to Toronto in late November, who on earth says no to that?
That's hilarious.
Only a madman would say no to that. You'll see shortly why I'm so keen to speak about this issue here in Canada. Let me put it this way, though, to begin with. I would say in recent years, any sentient observer of the media will have had their moment of realization, a moment where they saw through something that the mainstream media was doing. It may have happened because the mainstream media said something about you or someone you know. It may be, as in my case, for instance, that an entire country got maligned by the mainstream media. It's very interesting, this result. It was a 48-52. That's exactly the result that the British people had in the Brexit vote.
That's good.
You know what? When we voted to leave the European Union, we did so against all of the implications of the New York Times, Michelle's employer. We just didn't listen to them. And the New York Times never forgave us. Ever since 2016, there has not been one story in the New York Times that's positive about Britain. We have had, and I'll run through some of them, we had a culinary review that said that the British people still survive on mutton and oatmeal.
Ooh.
We had an anti-Brexit piece from the north of England, from Lancashire, a piece of reporting, where the author ended up having to admit that every single one of his facts was wrong, but his perception was correct. We had, recently the New York Times drafted in somebody from Russia Today, Vladimir Putin's propaganda channel, as an employee of the New York Times, to attack Brexit Britain. And when Her Majesty the Queen died, not 10 days of mourning was observed at the New York Times, 3 hours before they started attacking the Queen. And they did so day after day after day.
Wow. God save the Queen. That fascist regime. Wow. Just saying, he is nailing them to the wall. Oof.
Because they hate Brexit Britain. That is just an agenda, ladies and gentlemen. That's not anything else. That's an agenda. One they've decided to take. Now, I said that I want to be here in Canada to talk about this because I think that this country has just been through something absolutely extraordinary. You really know that the world is in trouble when Canada becomes very interesting. I remember your elections, as Norm MacDonald said, were all about, like, should we put up that bridge or not? Now Canada has become really interesting. It became interesting in January and February of this year. Why? Because you had protesters in Ottawa. Really interesting. When people come out in large numbers, and you know what the job of reporters is? The job of reporters is to go out and say, why are you on the streets? What brought you here? Why are you here with your kids? Why have you got a bouncy castle in the middle of Ottawa? That's a bit strange. Ask them questions. Just find out the story.
There you go. Ooh, that would be amazing. But that's not what they did.
But you know what? The government didn't want that in Canada. Your Prime Minister decided in advance that these people were, what did he do? All the modern excommunications. They were Nazis, they were white supremacists, they were anti-Semites, they were probably homophobes, they were misogynists, they were probably transphobes, etc., etc., etc. He did all the things you do in the modern political age if you want to just defenestrate somebody who's awkward to you. And then he brings in the Emergency Powers Act. Now, at such a time, what would the mainstream media do? It would question it. It would question it.
Yes. It would.
The Canadian mainstream media did not. The Canadian mainstream media acted as an amen chorus of the Canadian government. I will give you a couple of examples, but ladies and gentlemen, I could go on for hours with examples of this. You had a CBC host describing the Freedom Convoy as a, quote, feral mob. You had a Toronto Star columnist saying, quote, sorry for the language, it's a homegrown hate farm that was then jet-fueled by an American right-funded rat-fucking operation. Jesus, they can't even write at these papers anymore.
Oh, ouch. Ouch. Laying it down, Douglas.
CBC said that 2 Indigenous women who were so scared to go outside in Ottawa because of racist violence didn't bother to mention that Indigenous drummers had led the truckers in an O Canada rendition.
They look a little nervous on this one because he's stating exactly what they were doing.
The National Observer said that the many black and Indigenous Freedom Convoy supporters were in fact duped by the truckers. The Globe and Mail reporter said, my 13-year-old son told me to tell protesters I'm not a Jew out of fear of anti-Semitic violence without mentioning that one of the leaders of the convoy was himself Jewish. Now, why is this so rancid? Utterly, utterly rancid and corrupt. Because in this country, your media, your mainstream media, is funded by the government.
Ouch. And ouch. And ouch. Oh, Canada. Oh, Canada.
a totally corrupted system. In 2018, election year, coincidence, the Canadian media is given $595 million over 5 years. The Toronto Star estimated it was going to be getting $3 million from the government in the first half of the year. It went on and on. So you see, the mainstream, the government in Canada can tell people they can tell the banks to shut down people's bank accounts. Oh yeah, your government can do that, and if you're happy with that, just think about what would happen if the shoe was on the other foot. The government can do that, but in Canada, they can also tell the media what to do. And the media does the bidding of the Canadian government. That isn't a free society's media. I've seen unfree countries all my life. But this, in a developed liberal democracy like Canada, is a disgrace. We're not saying don't read the mainstream media. We're just saying don't trust them.
There you go. There you go. That's well put. Not saying don't read it, just don't trust it. Yeah. And that he laid down right there. Let me guess. Within the next 2.5, 3 minutes, something about racism or anti-Semitism is going to come out of this guy's mouth.
Thank you, Douglas. Okay, Malcolm, you're going to get the final opening statement today, so take us away.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back home. I thought I'd just tell 2 very simple stories. One of them will not be about the truckers, who I think have been well defended by my colleague, Mr. Murray. My first story is I spent the first 10 years of my journalism career at the Washington Post, which that is the definition of the mainstream media. And this was from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, in the era of the mainstream media's greatest influence. And the 2 things, it was there that I learned my trade as a journalist. And there were 2 things that were drilled into me at my time there. One was the importance of fairness. If you quoted someone denouncing someone else, you had to call up the person who was denounced and get a response. If X said something about Y, you had to call Y and find out how they felt about what X said. You had to make a good faith effort to talk to all sides of an issue.
If not, then why would you report what Y said? That's pretty simple. So if Y tells something about X, and you ask X and he says, I have nothing to say, that's ridiculous and preposterous, then why would you ever report what Y said?
And if you did not do that, your story did not appear in the paper, right? The second thing that was very important was accuracy. I remember once I did a story about a mall in Buffalo, and it was an upscale mall, and they had the bus stop across a busy highway from the mall. They didn't want the sort of person who came on a bus, to come to the mall. And in the course of writing this story, I
Did I mention that he was going to bring up some sort of racism, some sort of anti-Semitism into this discussion?
talked about what the bus service was. It was the Amherst bus. And I said, even the bus doesn't come from the city of Buffalo. That was an error, a dumb, stupid error. The next day, the bus service and the mall and the city of Buffalo called the paper very angrily, demanded a correction, which they got the next day in a very prominent place. And I was pulled in by my editor and given a dressing down that I remember to this day, right? I mean, basically, I was told I was this close to being fired. That's how seriously the paper took the commitment to accuracy in its pages. Now, Matt would have you believe that...
He's also talking about what it used to be like, not what it is currently like. So when he started, what was that? 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago that he started, and has it changed?
Those 2 principles are no longer a part of the brief of the mainstream media. I would like to say to him, that's completely false. He is so far removed from the mainstream media that I think he has a naive view about what goes on inside those institutions.
I think he would be wrong in that.
They remain committed to a professional set of ideals that they have held for decades. Story number 2. I was on a British podcast this summer, very much a media platform that is not part of the mainstream media. And it was a long 2-hour interview. And in the course of this, my host went on a long and impassioned critique of working from home. And I very briefly chimed in with a few thoughts of my own. I agreed with some of what he said and didn't agree with other things. Thought nothing of it because he occupied about 90% of that conversation. Then in the following week, when the podcast came out, they released a clip which was just of my contribution, making it sound like it was my impassioned rant. And then someone on social media picked it up and said that in the course of this impassioned rant, I had burst into tears.
Which he totally looks like he would burst into tears, which he may be bursting into tears before the end of this interview.
That's not true. And then someone else found a picture. We had moved into new offices, my company, and I had tweeted out a picture of my office because I was so proud of it. And someone took that picture online and said, this is Gladwell's picture of the office he works from home, which was nuts. But everyone believed that too. And so word got around the internet that I was someone who worked from home, believed everyone else should not work from home, and was so overwhelmed emotionally with my hypocrisy that I was close to tears.
So the main news media reported this? This was on the front page of the New York Times?
The height of it was, I was trending on Twitter for a while. It was quite an
Twitter's not real life.
extraordinary experience. The height of it was when some blogger in Philadelphia wrote a story saying this is exactly the sign of kind of...
So bloggers, he's talking about everything that is not the mainstream media.
Hypocrisy you should expect from a single childless man who never leaves his apartment. And so I called it up and said, I'm not single, I'm not childless, and I don't have an apartment, and I go to the office every day and I have done so for years. And he said, I'll correct it. But then, of course, he never did. And in the course of the entire controversy, only one reporter called me to try and set the record straight. And where did that reporter work? In the mainstream media. Now,
okay.
I've been talking, or others have been talking about content, the content of the things that people in the mainstream media say and the problems they have with that content. I don't think the issue here is content. The issue here is process, right? The issue here is the mainstream media has a set of professional norms in place that work the best way they can towards the production of fairness and accuracy.
Okay. But they're not following them.
The non-mainstream media is a set of institutions that are outside of that tradition, that have an open and not a closed platform. And you cannot have an open platform and simultaneously adhere to a strict set of professional norms.
Of course. I don't have to set to myself to any sort of strict form of professional norms. That just comes down to my own, the way that I want to be. If I say something and I'm inaccurate and somebody tells me I'm inaccurate, okay, I'm wrong. I take it back. No. I shouldn't have to have 1 million people ask for a redaction. I shouldn't have to have somebody call me up and blast it out on Twitter to say that what I said was wrong. If it happens, I would probably ignore them. Be like, okay, you're wrong, but I don't care.
You cannot say anyone can become a doctor and then complain when the surgeon takes out your spleen and thinking that it's your...
Not everyone can become a doctor, Not every news station or news medium, what we call the mainstream media, whenever they're wrong, if they don't admit they're wrong and they're found out that they're wrong, they lose the trust of the rest of the world.
Gallbladder, right? Now, why am I making such a big deal about this?
Because he had his gallbladder removed.
Because trust is not about content. Trust is about process. And there is one institution.
No.
Institution here that it strikes me has a commitment to the right kind of process, and a whole set of other institutions that most assuredly do not.
That would be the human being. The human being should be able to process their news without interference from somebody trying to tell you something that is not true. Don't tell me that it's a mostly peaceful protest whenever I see buildings burning in the background. Just pointing out the obvious here. I don't know what rock this guy's been living under, but it hasn't done him well.
Thank you, guys. Some terrific opening statements. That's what the Munk Debates is all about. You've heard these different arguments. Now we're going to get into rebuttals. It's an opportunity for each of our debaters to confront their opponent's ideas. You can follow along our running poll. The prompts are on the monitors, stage right and left. Let us know how you think this debate is unfolding in real time. But Matt Taibbi, you get the first opportunity to rebut what you've heard from Michelle and Malcolm.
Well, first of all, I think I should respond to Michelle, who simply misquoted me, proving my point. I never once said the media doesn't want you to hear about ivermectin. I don't care about ivermectin. What I wrote about was people being deleted from the internet by platforms like Facebook for talking about ivermectin, which I don't believe in. I believe people should be able to talk about what they want without being removed from the internet.
Oh, slammed.
You're going to be the second person who's going to owe me a correction after this 538.com has already done that, made that mistake. Malcolm, you seem to think I've never worked in the mainstream media. I spent 15 years at Rolling Stone. I spent all that time writing 7,000 word features that had to be fact-checked every line. I'm
Oh, ouch.
absolutely familiar with the process of mainstream media, and that's why I'm so disappointed in what happened. The New York Times and the entire, basically, mainstream media spent years following a fake story about Donald Trump being in league with Vladimir Putin to fix the 2016 election. It was a wrong story. We have a leaked audio tape that was published in Slate.com where the editor of the New York Times says, well, we got caught a little flat-footed on that one because, our readers who want Donald Trump to go away are going to be disappointed about this. He said we built our entire newsroom around one story, and they got it wrong. There's
Ouch.
no way to defend that kind of inaccuracy, and it only happens if everybody wants so badly for it to be true that they overlook all the guardrails that are in place. No serious journalist that I know looked at that story and didn't have qualms about it. Yes, there are processes in place, and there was once an ethos in place, but that ethos is gone now. And maybe the processes remain, but there are too many errors proving otherwise.
Oh, that's a big ouch. That slammed that into place.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to make a slight adjustment here on the clock because these rebuttals should be 3 minutes each, not 2. So I'll figure a way to get you another minute somewhere in this debate, Matt. So we'll get that changed or keep an eye on it. Let it count down for an
Matt
extra
doesn't
minute
need it.
once you have your full 3 minutes.
This is confidence right
I
there.
apologize for misquoting you, although I think I've read a lot of your writing on ivermectin, and I know that you've written quite a bit about deplatforming internet censorship. You've also said that we should be reporting on ivermectin. Did you not? Is that incorrect?
That was not the sense of those stories. The idea was Facebook was taking people off the internet for writing about ivermectin, and I was saying.
Okay,
simply
well,
saying
this is, I
didn't
mean,
agree
this
with
is,
that.
this is something checkable, so we can, but I wanted to speak more broadly.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, it's unfortunate that this
Ouch.
is not a debate about was Donald Trump's relationships with Russia improper, so that I could be arguing the pro side, but I'm not going to go deep into the weeds.
Because she can't go deep into the weeds because she doesn't know. She has no idea. She doesn't have Google to fact check the people that fact check. Or the fact checkers checking the fact checkers. Basically, she would be calling up someone at the New York Post that would be reporting the same thing as someone at the Washington Post that's just called up the New York Post. They got the story from someone at the Washington Post. And they do this circular back and forth until they say it so many times that they actually believe it. This is why she's having a hard time, because she's not following the news. She's asking questions of other reporters. Did you hear this story? Yes, I heard this story. And it's like a bad game of telephone.
Of that. I do want to go into the weeds of the Ottawa trucker protest, because I might have been the only one of us. Did you cover them? So I think I might have been the only one of us who was at the Ottawa trucker protest.
Glad to hear it.
And you know, I'm the kind of one of the liberal columnists at the Times. I've
Who cares?
covered the far right. I showed up at the Ottawa trucker protest kind of expecting the sort of things that I've seen at Donald Trump rallies, at various even further right events.
Okay, it's Ottawa. That's it. It's Ottawa. You expected it to be a Trump rally in Ottawa? You realize that Ottawa is in Canada, right, sweetie? I don't think she knows this. Or she seems very, very misinformed of this.
And didn't find it. You know, I was really quite astonished. I think that it's
Go figure. You were quite astonished. It was like me going to France. I was quite astonished that people spoke French there.
been pretty conclusively shown that the organizers of this protest were people on the far right, were people with very kind of unsavory and sometimes racist ideas.
It didn't take her but 30 seconds to be talking about racism, calling people racist.
I think that it's been pretty conclusively shown that the organizers of this protest were people on the far right, were people with very kind of unsavory and sometimes racist ideas. But what really shocked me walking around and talking to people was how many people were just either totally politically disconnected. I remember getting into a truck with someone saying, "What?"
Because they're not political actors. This is your problem. You spend too much time in politics, you dumb bimbo.
Inspired you to come here? And he said, mushrooms. You know, he had, he was tripping, and he had this desire to get in his car and drive, you know, but there was
Okay. I very much doubt that someone was taking mushrooms and getting in their car and taking a drive in the ice and snow. They were. That's driving under the influence. So I very much doubt.
There was a lot of people who were just traumatized. They were lonely. They were so happy to suddenly be surrounded by people after having been isolated for so long. People were hugging each other. People were hugging me, even though I'm from the hated mainstream media. And
Because, sweetie, people don't hate you. They held no personal animus against you until you lie about them. So I'm sure that they were absolutely loving and welcome. Now flip that on the other side. Imagine you've got a bunch of your favorite little drones, your little Antifa people, hanging out. What do you think the response is going to be whenever a Trump supporter walks amongst them and starts asking them questions? even if they're not from the mainstream media. What do you think's going to happen to them? Do you think they're going to walk out of there without a nice gentle hug, talking about tripping on mushrooms? What do you think would happen to them? Same situation, but on the other foot.
I told my editors that this is what I found, and they said, great. That's more interesting than what we thought you were going to find. It was more interesting. And I wrote it, and they devoted an entire page to it. I'm not going to defend all of the mainstream media coverage of the Ottawa trucker protests. I didn't follow every single bit of reporting on it in the Canadian media. But I do think that having the ethos of wanting to be surprised and being willing to be surprised is something that you are more likely to find in, the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in people who write, in the New Yorker,
On a rare and infrequent occasion, that is true.
than it is with people who do write for some of these
But that's a rarity and not the norm, sweetie.
contrarian alternatives to the mainstream media, and they really do start with a story that they want to, a story that they intend to tell, often a story about the mistakes and dishonesties of the mainstream media. But the truth is much more complicated than that.
But you just gave us a bunch of word salad talking about something that you did that was so wonderful and so great. But what about the horrible things that you've done? The mistakes that you've made? The verifications that you did not get?
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, Douglas, same opportunity for you. 3 minutes on the clock. Let's have your rebuttal.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted you went to the protest. I'm sorry I was on another story at the time. And I'm delighted that you reported honestly, since you didn't report Matt's comments honestly tonight.
Ooh.
And the last time you were on this stage with Jordan Peterson, you didn't report his comments accurately either.
Ouch! That's where I remember her from.
Let me address the main point that has come out from the other side, which is that the mainstream media has frailties. Sure, it has frailties. And nobody is saying that non-mainstream media don't have frailties. Of course they do. The simple proposal in front of the audience tonight is whether or not you can trust the mainstream media.
Wow, keeping it on point. Yes. Unimpassioned, straight to the point. This is impressive to watch.
That is that you don't need anything else. You don't need any other information from elsewhere. You can just turn on CBC in the evening and you've got your stuff. You can pick up the New York Times, the Washington Post in the morning, and you know that there's no spin on the story. It's absolutely accurate reporting.
It's not an opinion piece. It is actual news.
I was interested by Malcolm's story about himself because I wonder, Malcolm, if you hadn't have been yourself, whether you would have got that call from a journalist. I wonder if you weren't yourself, if you weren't a New York Times best-selling author, if you didn't speak to audiences like this. I wonder if you're just an ordinary member of the public who'd been grossly defamed in the mainstream media, whether they'd have bothered with you. I'd submit no. Because time and again, that's been shown to be the case. Now look, as I say, you don't have to believe this evening that you should never read the mainstream media. What we're simply saying, among other things, is, firstly, the mainstream media isn't the mainstream media that it used to be when we were all, sorry, some of you are a lot younger, but when most of us were growing up, okay? It's just not the same thing. It's running for money, it's running for cash, it's running for ratings and much more. It's just a different mainstream media, and you do need outside sources in that. You do need upstart blogs. You don't only need them, you don't need only read them, but you do need them. The second thing is, again, I come back to it. If the mainstream media today wants to put a spin on a story, they can do it all the way. Look at what happened the other day with the Colorado gay bar shooting in America.
Ouch. Ouch. I forgot that's about the time that this happened.
Again, we're in Canada. I don't want to talk just about America. Look at this, an appalling event. Somebody goes up and shoots up a gay bar. Whole load of the media start talking about the right wing, about the right wing shock jocks who've caused this. They go on and on about it day after day until, oh, it turns out the man taken into custody is non-binary. Story disappears.
Yes, where did that story go? Have you heard any more about it? In the past, I don't know, this has been, what, about a month ago? Where did that story go? That guy was arrested. You hearing anything about him yet?
That would have been a really interesting story to keep on at. But it just goes away because the narrative isn't the one that the mainstream media wanted. It's too complex. So I applaud you, Michelle, when you go and find complex stories and you explain the complexity. But that's not the habit of the mainstream media anymore.
Ouch. And he's just mic drop done right there.
Thank you, Douglas. Okay, our last rebuttal is from Malcolm. Malcolm, take us away.
Couple things that I'm...
Now, you also notice that Malcolm has to take a lot of notes because he's going to try to call them out on some BS. And they're doing, both Matt Taibbi and Douglas and Michelle, to her credit, are doing this off the top of their head.
puzzled over. One is that I thought that since you guys were in favor of the proposition, you would at some point have given us a definition of what you meant when you used the phrase mainstream media.
Oh, Jesus. Not that this is a tired trope of trying to change tactics whenever you know that you're absolutely losing. It's like we are talking about the mainstream media that is not to be trusted. Well, what do you mean now by the mainstream media? Okay, this is somebody that is absolutely lost in the debate whenever they have to do this.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for that.
They tried this with Jordan Peterson also, and Jordan tore them up on it.
Because what it seems to me that you're doing is you're giving a bunch of very cogent and accurate critiques of the media. But the proposition before us is not that the media behaves nicely and well all the time. It's whether the mainstream media does. And without you giving us any direction about what you mean with that phrase, I'm a little lost.
Oh, of course. You just seem a little lost all the time because you've got no rebuttal to anything that they've said. There's no counterpoint to be made. You're basically wanting him to define the mainstream media. Well, it's just media to me, but then whenever you say, okay, well, if you're going to say that it's media, we're talking about the media that owns most of the airwaves, the majority of the airwaves. Bob over here, maybe he's on Twitter. He doesn't own anything. He's got a small little startup. Maybe he does woodworking on the weekends, and he enjoys playing with his dogs. And he just happens to write cool, interesting stories. That's just Bob. This moron here is giving a absolute horrible trope to the same tired bullshit that everybody tends to do whenever they start losing in a debate because he knows that he is already lost. Define what you mean by X, Y, or Z. It's not my job to define. Everybody already knows. And I think Douglas or even Matt is probably going to tear him up on this. I really want to see that happen. I really do, because it is about to happen. It's a tired trope, and it's usually done by somebody that's losing because they are trying to get you caught up in the weeds of their stupidity. That's all that this is. He's trying to get him caught up into the stupidity. Of course, it's done this silly little thing where it's gone.
Media.
Okay, here we
But
go.
the proposition before us is not that the media behaves nicely and well all the time. It's whether the mainstream media does. And without you giving us any direction about what you mean with that phrase, I'm a little lost. And for example, Douglas, I noticed in your comments
Douglas is going to tear him up.
You said that would I have been called if I were not who I am? It was a very puzzling locution. But if I were someone else, would I have been called, if I had been, quote, and I'm quoting from you, if someone else had been, quote, grossly defamed in the mainstream media. But I wasn't grossly defamed in the mainstream media. I was grossly defamed in the non-mainstream media, which is my point, right?
So
The second thing was, I was greatly...
So he just made Douglas's point. The question that he asked a minute ago, I want you to define the mainstream media, because all I've seen is the media. And I wasn't grossly defamed in the mainstream media. It was the mainstream media that reached out to me. But I want you to define the mainstream media, because this guy has lost. He's a whiny little baby that has lost.
Amused by the affection Matt Taibbi has for the age of Walter
Matt Taibbi just corrected him. It's Taibbi.
Walter Cronkite, which he seemed to hold up as a kind of golden moment. In that moment, the mainstream media was populated entirely by white men from elite schools.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Now you're going to bring up the white-black thing. It was mainly done by white men from elite schools. Wonderful. Well, I'm a white man. I didn't go to an elite school. Actually, I take that back. I did go to an elite school. There's not too many people that actually got the same schooling that I did. But many men before me did. They got the same schooling. But you can't even go to the elite school that I went to anymore. Isn't that amazing? The elite school that I went to was 63 Bravo training. Become a mechanic. There were plenty of people that took 63 Bravo. But that MOS doesn't exist anymore. Cheers. So, sure, I'm a white man that went to an elite school. But this guy thinks that nobody else's opinion matters except for the mainstream media's. Douglas is going to chew him to bits on this too.
Why you would have had such affection and say that's the gold standard, and we should trust the mainstream media precisely at the moment when the mainstream media is least representative, is really puzzling to me. I would point out that at the height of Walter Cronkite's reign in American media, neither people like Michelle and I wouldn't have been on the stage, right? We weren't part of the conversation. So I don't know.
That's not the point. He's talking about things that happened in the past. He's talking about currently. He's talking about here and now.
Know why we should hold such a kind of affection for that moment. I was also struck by the contradictions between the comments that both of you made. When Douglas said that he was very upset at the way the Canadian media acted as an amen chorus of the Canadian government with respect to the truckers, I would just point out that the reason Walter Cronkite was so beloved by people like Matt Taibbi's father and grandfather is that he was an amen chorus for the United States government. So the two of you should really get together in the next 5 minutes and work out your story. One last comment, and that is I was most amused by this.
This is a man right here that is lost. He has lost and he knows it.
By the particular subjects that seem to have excited the imagination and outrage of the two of you. I'll just list them before I go in my last 19 seconds. Donald Trump's relationship with Russia, the Canadian truckers, ivermectin, Jordan Peterson, and then something about this thing in... These aren't things driven by the mainstream media. These are obsessions of the non-mainstream media. Once again, work it out, guys.
Yeah, this is a guy that's completely lost. He is completely lost.
Donald...
This debate is going off, as they say. I love it.
No, it's not really going off. It's very confusing.
So I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative here, and I'm going to do another round of rebuttals, guys. I'm not going to interrupt this wonderful back and forth. So, Matt, this time you are going to get 3 minutes on the clock, and then I'll figure out whether the rest get 3 minutes or 2 minutes. But you go first. 3 minutes on the clock to rebut what you've just heard.
First of all, are you really saying that Trump's relationship with Russia wasn't not an obsession of mainstream media? It was basically the entire content of cable news for 3 years.
Yep.
There was almost, again, the editor of the New York Times, Dean Baquet, said, we built our newsroom around one story, that story. The New York Times doesn't get much more mainstream than that, I don't think. Defining the mainstream media is simple. I talked before about a bifurcated system where we have essentially two politically homogenous audiences. We have Fox News and conservative media on one side. The mainstream media, roughly speaking, is the other side, right? That's what we mean when we talk about the mainstream media. And yes, as I said in my speech, the old system under Walter Cronkite had its flaws, but it did have its advantages as well. Making the effort to talk to everybody garnered more trust in the public.
Yep.
There was a reason why people trusted news people more 20 or 30 or 40 years ago than they do now.
I don't know if that's true. 20 years ago, 40 years ago, yeah. I could pretty much trust what I was reading in the news. 20 years ago, I think it was going off the rails 20 years ago, pretty much. Yeah, it was still pretty well trusted, but we found a lot of that trust was misplaced in what we were being told and what was actually happening.
Now, when people meet someone from the New York Times or from the Washington Post or from MSNBC out in middle America, they don't talk to them. You cannot get, those interviews are very difficult to get now because people perceive those institutions to be not on their side. This is very different. I know this as a campaign reporter myself. I've watched over the years how this has changed. Once upon a time, I could interview for Rolling Stone Republicans with no problem. People loved it. They would always talk about how Dr. Hook was in the cover of Rolling Stone. But over the years, progressively, people became more reserved and they became more distrustful, and they should have been, because the media made more and more mistakes over those years.
Yes.
Think about the WMD episode. We talked about the haloed processes of the mainstream media. Everybody got this wrong. And not only did they get that wrong, after they got it wrong, they promoted all the people who were the most wrong and fired all the people who were the most right. Some of the people were never forgiven for getting that story right, and some of them are editing major magazines today for getting it wrong. So that people have a reason to distrust the media. Of course they do. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
And this guy's rattling off in this notebook. Matt Taibbi is the weak link in this one. I will say that he started out strong, not as strong as he was, and I mean, he's still making very good points, but he's weakening up a little bit. I think that Douglas is really holding his own and keeping it tight on this, like really tight.
For the sake of time and moving us to this debate, I'm going to go 2 minutes each for the remaining 3 rebuttals in this second round. So we'll set the clock to 2 minutes. And Michelle, you're up.
So I guess the point that I keep coming back to is that this critique of the mainstream media, and particularly this critique of the mainstream media, is kind of ideologically blinkered, is itself, I think, rooted in a very simplistic and distorted view of what's happening.
And I'm sure this sounds really good whenever she's sitting around with her friends, showing how smart she is because of all the publications I write for. And I use 50-cent words that I got out of a thesaurus. Oh, I am so smart. And we ponder these thoughts as we smoke weed and have our drinks and our mimosas We discuss these same kind of things over drinks on a regular basis because there's a deep understanding of this. But unlike everybody else on this panel, they probably live their life. She's very young, so I imagine just by the way that she talks.
Both in politics and in the relationship between the media and politics. I mean, specifically the idea that there was nothing to the Trump-Russia story. And I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, but this is bananas. I mean, certainly the Mueller, people put too much hope, people who despise Trump put too much hope in that Mueller would bring him to justice.
She's lost again. She's just spewing out word salad. See, these are the kinds of debates that she's used to having with her friends, people that agree with her, that just go, Michelle, you're so right, you're so smart, you're so right, you're so smart, Michelle. This is the kind of debate that you have with your friends, where you think you're always right, because your friends go, you're so smart, you're so right, yeah, you go girl, you got it. This is not the kind of debate that you have with intellectuals. She's talking down to all three of these gentlemen that are on the stage with her, thinking that they have not been in this business for quite some time.
But what we've learned, I remember when this report first came down that...
Yeah, you remember, because, this is such a bombshell. This report about Trump comes down and it was all wrong.
That there was kind of concern in the intelligence agencies about Trump's relationship with Russia. If we had at that moment known that Donald Trump's campaign asked Russia for help.
Oh, she was going to get hammered so hard because she just ignored everything that is true.
In winning the election, asked Russia for help in the election. If we had known that Donald Trump was seeking to do a huge business deal in Moscow and seeking Putin's assistance, if we had known...
They're just shaking their head over there going, oh my God.
Known at that moment that his campaign manager, who before then had managed the campaign of pro-Russian candidates in Ukraine, if we had known that his campaign manager was passing intelligence to somebody who was believed to be a KGB agent, and if we had known that Russia then did hack and leak the emails of the Democratic candidate for president, we would have thought, well, this is an astonishing blockbuster. And so it's really much more complicated than that. Finally, about Club Q.
What are you saying, woman? Spit it out.
Nobody believes that he is non-binary.
Well, if you don't believe he's non-binary, why are you not reporting it? Why? Why are you not reporting it if you believe he's non-binary? You don't believe he's non-binary. That would make a great story right there. We don't believe he's non-binary.
If they did, they would think that this was a fascinating story and would love to report it.
No, they wouldn't.
The media loves counterintuitive stories more than it loves ideologically.
Sit down, woman. Shut up.
Ideologically convenient stories. It's simply that everyone knew that he was trolling us.
Douglas Murray is just nodding his head in disbelief of her stupidity. And I don't blame him. I would too.
When he said that. Thank you.
Okay, Douglas, let's have your second rebuttal.
Thank you. Would that they were still interested in that nuance, Michelle. Would that they were. Malcolm Gladwell said we need to define mainstream media. If we haven't, it's because I spoke to the organizers before this tonight saying, are we going to spend the whole of the debate debating what the mainstream media definition should be? And they assured me not. But we can do. Let me do it in shorthand. The mainstream media, in my view, would be, for instance, things like government-subsidized media that say what the government wants them to say. I would say that it was the legacy media, the newspapers we used to trust once and we don't trust anymore, the ones that used to be the papers of record and which have slowly descended into just partisan hackery of whatever their own particular peccadillos are that month. Malcolm, you did a little nasty jab there, I noticed, at Matt, by trying to pretend that Matt Taibbi is desperate for the era of white men in broadcasting. It takes a certain chutzpah to make that claim, but I don't see any reason why that is the case with Matt. I don't think that you are hankering desperately for a world of white news presenters. You never, we've only just met, but you didn't give off that vibe to me.
Ouch. Ouch.
And when Malcolm says you got to get your story right, guys, I know it's easy for a cheap laugh line, but I don't see why we do. We're two very different people with very different careers, interests, and much more. We've trodden very different paths across very wide swathes of this planet. And we don't need to get our story straight for you, or for this audience tonight, or be in lockstep. Differences of opinion, including on the same side, used to be cherished.
Absolutely. Damn, Douglas just laid it out. I told you Douglas is going to lay this guy out on his BS. Because it just works so well. Damn. Damn, you English bastard.
I could do like more, but I'll leave.
Matt just about lost it because, yeah, Douglas is smooth like that. I would one day enjoy shaking that man's hand and saying thank you for the entertainment, because it is absolutely entertaining watching him.
Thank you. Okay, let's get our last rebuttal here from Malcolm. 2 minutes.
Oh, this should be interesting. Oh, I've only got 2 minutes. I'm a whiny little man.
Take us away.
I was astonished to listen
as you probably always are,
Matt Taibbi doubled down on his defense of Walter Cronkite. I feel like there should be a giant picture of Walter Cronkite behind. And he said, the most incredible quote was, Walter Cronkite, the era of that era in journalism was distinguished by people, journalists, quote, making the effort to talk to everybody. Now, he's talking about the 1950s and 60s.
So is what Malcolm's saying in the 1950s and 1960s that we didn't have the gays, that we didn't have the blacks, that we didn't have the whites, that we didn't have the Chinese, we didn't have the yellow skins, we didn't have whatever ethnicity you're about to bring up, because I can see where he's going with this, and it is so much bullshit coming out of this guy's mouth, because not once did Matt Taibbi say anything disparaging about anybody, but Malcolm has got it in his fucking head that white men bad, because that's all that was around in the 1950s and 1960s. You don't hear anything about the other people that were around the 1950s and 1960s. It was like all of a sudden in the 1950s and 1960s, the black man was released from slavery. The Asians just showed up on our shores. In the 1980s, that had to be whenever they started taking over everything. That's not what Matt's saying at all. He's talking about mainstream media shouldn't be trusted. And this might be one of the reasons why, because of partisan hacks like this little bastard.
I just wanted to make a short list of the people who were not spoken to by journalists in the 1950s and 60s. And you may want to add some if I missed some.
Here he goes.
Black people, women.
Women weren't spoken about in the 1950s and 1960s. They didn't exist. They weren't spoken about.
Poor people,
Oh, and poor people, they didn't exist either in the 1950s or 60s.
gay people, people with mildly left-wing views. I mean, words
Word salad.
fail me when somebody
Words fail you quite often, Malcolm, because you're just making crap up as you go.
when it presented with a critique of his rather idiosyncratic position on Walter Cronkite, comes back and says, "Oh no, there's more to my great love of this man." The other thing that struck me in their comments was there's a
Yeah, and they're both looking at each other like, what is this guy talking about? Where is he going?
weird obsession with the two of them with the notion that the media occasionally gets things wrong. And I wonder if they have confused the role of journalists with that of stockbrokers. Stockbrokers have to get their predictions right.
No, they don't. Stockbrokers don't have to get anything right. They just move on to the next stock. I mean, they hope they get it closer, but no one can predict the future.
But journalists don't. The job of a journalist is to use that famous phrase to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And sometimes that means you go down some dead.
So is he saying they didn't do that in the 50s and the 60s, 40s, 30s, 20s? They didn't do that?
Ends, and you chase stories that don't turn out as you want them or wish them or hope that they would turn out.
Because you're not supposed to wish or hope or anything. You're supposed to basically just report. That's it.
But that is the nature of the business. And if that business seems uncomfortable to you, then I would suggest you should go into stockbroking.
Okay. No. I'm confused what he's talking about. I understand what he said. I'm just confused of his point.
Great debate. Let me join and spend a little bit of time with you before closing statements, just trying to think of some of the questions that are top of mind for this audience, having listened to this back and forth. And let me come to you first, Matt, because I want to pick up on an argument that Malcolm made earlier tonight, that this is about this debate and the issue of trust. Because let's get back to our resolution, be it resolved, don't trust mainstream media. For some in Malcolm and Michelle's camp, it's about a process. It's about a commitment to a learning, a teaching, a profession. Why isn't that a reason to feel that there is something very special about the mainstream media versus Substack, where you work, where, I don't know, I assume those types of things are somewhat arbitrary as to whether your fellow contributors on Substack really care about fact-checking or care about searching out the other side to a story or to an opinion?
Well, first of all, let's talk about process. Michelle brought up the assistant to Donald Trump's campaign manager, Konstantin Kilimnik. She called him a suspected Russian agent. Right. Yeah. He was also, we know definitely he was a source for the U.S. State Department, but his name, Konstantin Kilimnik, was splashed all over the news for a year. Do you know how many reporters called him? 2. Aaron Mate, a Canadian journalist, by the way, and myself. Nobody called him. This person who's supposedly the linchpin of the entire conspiracy, his telephone number is public. It's in the Senate report. Nobody from the Senate called him. Robert Mueller didn't call him. Nobody from the New York Times called him. It was left to a couple of independent journalists to do it, which to me suggests that there's something going on process-wise that's a little different from the way things used to be.
Oh.
Once upon a time, I think journalists were more interested in what was true and what was not true than whether or not this fit the narrative or not. And I think what happened with the Trump-Russia story is, what's the upside for a lot of these institutions to call up somebody like Konstantin Kilimnik and find out his side of the story? Is that going to get on the front page of the New York Times? Probably not. And so, yes, there are processes. Fact-checking is important. I do it. I hire fact-checkers to do it. But this is not the standard process for all mainstream media institutions anymore. We don't do it as much as we used to. Part of that is for financial reasons.
Wait, I can't sit here and let you make these statements that without any kind of, we don't do.
They just got under his skin. This is a man that knows he's lost.
Do that as much as we used to for financial reasons. I mean, I worked at the New Yorker. The New Yorker, if anything, spends more money on fact-checking today than it did in the past. I would have thought, with my first book, I didn't hire a fact-checker, but then I observed the number of errors in it. I also observed that the nature of the journalism world in which we live, the scrutiny of journalists is such that it's really perilous not to have a fact checker. And so now I have fact checkers. Many other people, I think, have observed the same thing, that there is now so much attention paid to the accuracy of things that writers say that you'd better make sure you don't have errors in your. So, I mean, Matt, I understand that you do have this wonderful nostalgia for the way things used to be.
He's talking out of both, one side of his mouth saying one thing and one side of his mouth is saying another. The way it used to be at the New Yorker, when I worked at the New Yorker, and I know that you're nostalgic about the way things used to be.
But I think that you need to fact check some of your nostalgic notions about the wonderful world of the 1950s.
That's a man that's lost.
Who was watchdogging the New York Times in the 1950s? Nobody was. It was a tiny little universe of people now watchdog.
It was a tiny little universe of people that used to report the news.
Institutions like that, and so they have a higher commitment to the truth.
So first of all,
Hold on, Matt. Let's bring Douglas in on this. I just want to hear his voice.
Doug is speechless.
I'm never speechless.
Oh, Douglas is about to lay into you, Malcolm, because what you said was such bullshit.
It's not a problem I suffer from. I can't sit here and listen to Malcolm Gladwell talking about fact-checking and the importance of it. Not to get too mean, Malcolm. I read your book, David and Goliath. The chapter on Northern Ireland is more filled with inaccuracies than any other chapter in a non-fiction book I have read. It is, having written a not very well selling, but widely acclaimed book on Northern Ireland myself, my book on Northern Ireland didn't sell anywhere near as much as yours did, Malcolm. But mine was filled with facts. And
Well, now.
your chapter on Northern Ireland was so filled with inaccuracies. Irish historians ripped it apart. Would that you had a fact checker, Malcolm. Would that you did your own research. But anyway, let me get back to another point.
I must say, you do a very good job of it. But you must say, you do have a tendency to accuse those who disagree with your opinions.
No, it's not disagreement.
It's
not disagreement, Malcolm. You didn't know that the provisional IRA were responsible for 60% of the deaths in the Troubles. There were basic things you just didn't know, Malcolm. No. I'm sorry, it's not my fault, it's yours and your fact checkers.
I didn't know that the function of this debate was to rehash the accuracy of a chapter in a book
Oh, dude, I'm telling you, Malcolm is just losing it. He's flummoxed.
The one that started talking about fact checkers. I'm simply saying, why don't you employ some?
I suspect.
God damn. Ouch. Just ouch. Oh,
I
Or your
suspect,
publishers.
Douglas,
But
I
why don't I make the point I wanted to make other than that?
briefly, yes. Good Lord.
Take the Hunter Biden story.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
yep. See, now Malcolm is losing it because he's going to interrupt the whole time because this is not a man that can debate. This is a man that likes to argue.
Of course you don't
Is
want to
there
hear
no end to the kind of Twitter
of course
stuff
you don't
guys
want
are...
to.
Oh, Malcolm. You have no idea the Twitter stuff that you're talking about. No, it was reported, if I'm not mistaken, by the New York Post. And it was silenced. Of course, Malcolm's not going to find this out for 24 hours. And in 24 hours, that's whenever the Twitter file is going to be released, and it becomes more than just a Twitter story.
You're going to dredge
Of
up
course you don't want to hear it, Malcolm. Of course you wouldn't, because it goes against your ideological presumptions. That story was a big story, okay? It was a big story. The New York Post, which I write for, but the New York Post, America's oldest newspaper, was silenced on Twitter, was silenced across the media. You know, the Washington Post has now picked it up. It's saying that, yeah, the laptop's true. But why didn't the media pick it up before? Why didn't they call up people? Why didn't they check whether the emails were accurate? Because they didn't want Biden to lose the election. He was their guy. And they weren't going to screw that up. Now, I ask you...
Can I respond to that? Can I respond to that?
Oh, shut up, woman. Can I respond to that? Yeah, give it a minute. You can respond to it.
Not only that, this is an important allegation, and I knew the Hunter Biden laptop was going to come up. It had to land, so it's landed at just the right time. So, Michelle, let's come to you on this, because I think many people...
Wait, I do want to talk about the Hunter Biden laptop, because I actually was telling Malcolm, we were talking this morning, and I said, I bet they're going to want to talk about the Hunter Biden laptop.
We don't care about your internal dialogue with Malcolm. Both of you seem like very, very weak individuals.
And he said to me, really? Who would care about that?
Yeah,
But I want to say
Yeah, she cares.
this about the Hunter Biden laptop, because again, I feel like this story is this is a revisionist history.
She looks like a Muppet. The way her legs are, sort of dangling over the side, and she's just sort of... she should stand more.
I mean, let's remember what happened with the Hunter Biden laptop. The person who wrote the New York Post story asked to have their name taken off of it because they thought the story was unreliable.
Oh, Jesus. Now, Malcolm works at the New York Post, and he probably knows who the writer was for that particular story. He probably knows them personally.
The people who had the hard drive would not give it to the Washington Post and the New York Times before the election. So you're basically saying, why didn't they...
She is so wrong on so many levels. Her news information came from another news information that fed her BS that's not true.
rely...
It's like this. If you want to know what a woman thinks, you want to know where women's mind is at, don't read Cosmo. Don't read Cosmo. Go talk to a woman and ask them where their mind is at. Simple as that.
On the post reporting that the reporter himself considered unreliable. And I went back through some of this stuff because I figured we'd be talking about this. The Washington Post, yes, has been able to confirm they hired forensic experts, were able to confirm some of the emails on the Hunter Biden laptop and some of the other material. There's I don't think anyone's disputing that Hunter Biden is a, both corrupt and troubled person.
That is not what the Hunter Biden laptop was about. It was the information of his dealings with Joe Biden. Pictures were fluff. It was the other stuff that was on there about Joe Biden. You notice the FBI is not really digging too deep into that.
But I just want to, I wrote this down because I thought this might come up. Among the reasons for the inconclusive findings was the sloppy handling of the data, which damaged some records. The experts found that the data had been repeatedly accessed and copied by people other than Hunter Biden over nearly 3 years. Blah, 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 the FBI. The security experts who examined the data for the Post struggled to reach definitive conclusions about the contents as a whole, including whether all of it originated from a single computer or could have been assembled from files from multiple computers and put on the portable drive. So the media has
spoken like a person that knows nothing about computers.
Covered this, but they have also been, I think, careful given the fact that this stuff still cannot be authenticated. And I spoke at the very beginning about the media kind of trying to self-correct, sometimes to a fault. And
this is where she is completely wrong, because that is not true. Everything that she is saying is completely wrong. This is why you shouldn't trust the midwit media.
When there was a leak, when Hillary Clinton's emails were leaked and emails from the DNC were leaked.
This woman is the definition of midwit, the absolute definition of it.
In 2016, I mean, I was at the Democratic convention, and you sort of saw how it turned the mood, how it soured the mood, how it angered so many of the Bernie Sanders supporters. So it had a real impact on the way that race unfolded. And I think that in retrospect, a lot of media came to see that how that material was obtained and how it was kind of strategically disseminated was as important of a story as the contents of those emails, and that they had made a mistake by only focusing on the latter. And so they didn't want to make the same mistake again with the Hunter Biden laptop. And you were arguing, it seems to me, that they should have.
Yeah, so guys, let's have you respond to that, because this could be an example where the media, seeing a campaign of successful disinformation run by a foreign government against a candidate running for president of the United States, could in a sense be replicated again in the Biden laptop. Maybe that was not the case in the end, but wasn't that a responsible thing that only the mainstream media would have done, taking a more cautious approach to uncertainty when reporting the news?
First of all, the 2016 campaign was not disinformation. It wasn't fake. Those emails were real. They were all authentic. The manner of how they were obtained was shady, but they were true. So you can't call it disinformation. Neither was this. This was not disinformation. And news organizations are not required to report on anything. No one has to do the story on the Hunter Biden laptop if they don't want to. They're not obligated to. However, they went beyond not covering it. They wrote stories that this was Russian disinformation. They repeated the statements made by 50 former intelligence officials who described this as having all the earmarks of a Russian information campaign. By the way, they didn't use the word disinformation. But that wasn't even the most important part of the story. The important part of that story wasn't even about Hunter Biden. It was about the decision by Facebook and Twitter, at the behest, at least in the case of Facebook, of the US government to quash or dial down that story and deny access to that story. That is a historic moment in the history of censorship in our country.
And, of course, by Twitter Files Part 1 through 12 or 50 or however far it's gone right now, it's shown that that's the case. But this poor excuse for a woman, Michelle, get your head out of that big, fat ass of yours and do some research. That's your job. Simple as that, woman. Just pull your head between those two ass cheeks and figure this out. Because you've been wrong so many times. And that's just in this debate.
And
Okay, come quickly on this side.
I've got to add to that. I've got to add that. It's like, Malcolm, you're kind of, oh my God, what a yawnaroo the whole Hunter Biden story is. How boring to talk about the idea of corruption at an epic scale in the first family. How boring. Who would want to harp on about that? Let me try the counterfactual on you. Let me try the counterfactual on you. It's October 2020. And a huge number of emails are suddenly dumped, revealing unbelievable scandal in the Trump family. I don't want to concentrate on the dick pics and the crack and stuff. Never mind about Don Jr. if he'd been doing that. Let's just focus on the emails. There was a very easy way, Michelle, as you know, to certify whether this stuff was true. You could call up anyone on the email chains and say, did you get this email? They didn't bother with any of that stuff. They'd have been excited as hell across most of the mainstream media if this had been emails from Donald Trump's son saying, and I'm no Trump fan, let's not get into that cheap rut. But if it had been Don Jr. saying to his child, you've no idea what I've done for this family, the demeaning things I've gone through, I have to give half of everything I earn to my dad. Oh, you're Nauru, definitely. Who'd care about that? No, the point is simply that this was one of the occasions in recent years where the mainstream media showed its transparency as a political organization. That's why we care.
Okay. So this is a key point of the debate that I think Malcolm's on a lot of audience members' minds. Why is it when these mistakes, or in case maybe this wasn't a mistake, a sudden consciousness emerges, why does it always seem to, if we look at the circumstances over the last few years, benefit one political orientation and seem to disadvantage a party or an individual of another political orientation?
That doesn't really have to be the case.
I mean, does anybody remember the completely outsized attention paid to Hillary Clinton's information security protocol?
Okay. Yes, and that was quashed very quickly in the news. The news basically said, this is a story, a non-story, it's Russian disinformation. This is being brought about by Russia. This is Russian disinformation, Benghazi, oh, that was a horrible thing, but Hillary Clinton knew nothing about this. This is nothing, this is a nothing burger, and that's all that was reported on the news. I remember it very well. Yes. There was attention paid to it, but everybody else did not want to discuss it. And whenever she destroyed those computers and destroyed all of that information, the media destroyed it along with it.
Protocols in the run-up to the 2016 election. I mean, this was on the front page of the New York Times.
No, it wasn't.
Constantly, this was just an absolute drumbeat.
But the way that it was reported in the Washington Times is saying, oh, this is really nothing.
The most important...
See, my problem with it is, until it actually comes face to face with you, will you ever even mention it? Like, it has to become so obvious that you're wrong, that you're finally faced with how wrong you are. That's the only time that the mainstream media is ever going to report on anything.
In the 2016 election was Hillary Clinton having a private email server.
And you were the woman that was probably crying whenever you found out that Hillary Clinton had lost. Because there's no way she could have possibly lost. All the news media was saying, she's got this in the bag. There's no way she can lose. She's the best person for this job. You women were crying because you could not believe that your hero, your pantsuit in chief, could ever possibly lose against such a misogynistic, white, racist, Nazi, horrible, vile, money-grubbing, horrible person. But yet, you lost.
I mean, the idea that these distortions always benefit Democrats.
The distortions always benefit Democrats until it becomes so obvious that the story cannot be ignored, you dim-witted broad.
And work against Republicans is simply not the case. Again, I apologize for making this so, kind of America-centric.
She's looking for validation from Malcolm, and Malcolm is just like, oh, God, woman, shut up.
And I would similarly say, BuzzFeed published the Steele dossier after the 2016 election, but it was floating around.
The Steele dossier was wrong.
Before then, and people didn't report on it because they couldn't verify any of it. So
that's not true.
Again, I just think the media makes mistakes, but the idea that the media,
because the Steele dossier was a nothing burger. It was made up by Hillary Clinton's campaign. You dumb woman.
Is the idea that these mistakes always run in one direction. It is simply not the case.
Do you want to come in on this, Malcolm?
Well, I was struck once.
Well, I was struck once by intelligence, but it failed.
Again, in listening to our opponents, by how much their arguments resemble the kind of classic structure of a conspiracy theory.
If you can't attack them on truth and facts, attack them on anything but. It sounds like a conspiracy theory to me.
A conspiracy theory is a theory in which one assumes a degree of unanimity and collaboration amongst one's foes, right? The conspiracist speaks of those who disagree with himself or herself as if they had a single voice.
Well, whenever they scream out in a single voice, basically speaking verbatim the same words, tends to sound a little bit like BS. I'm always wary when everybody's saying, do it, do it, do it, and I haven't looked into it. Makes me very wary.
And there are numerous really unpleasant examples of this. This is not one of those. This is a much milder, more naive variant on the traditional conspiratorial model. But nonetheless, when Matt and Doug speak about the mainstream media, they're acting as if there's a big room.
No. You're acting like it's a big room. They never mentioned that.
Possibly in New York or in Washington, D.C.
Jesus, Malcolm. You're a moron.
Or maybe in between, so that each party has equal access to the room, in which everyone gathers every morning and makes up the agenda for the day, right? And the people fly in from the big news networks, and someone from CBC comes down, and this cabal of high-minded, well-paid.
Now, who sounds like they're talking about conspiracy theories?
Elite white, as it turns out, journalists, some of them, the ones that Matt seems to have such affection for.
See, you're losing your crowd there, Malcolm.
Gathered together and set the agenda for the country. Now, I don't know where this room is. I speculated that maybe it's in Maryland, because that would be equidistant.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one, Matt. Like, my God, you're losing your crowd.
Between these two places. But this is a fantasy, right? A conspiratorial fantasy. The truth is that the elements, and this is why I made a big point about their failure to define what the mainstream media is.
It's wherever you're getting your news source from. It's the main vein of news. It's the people that have access to that information and how it's released. Because if you've got access to the news, just because that's your fucking job, you goddamn morons. So you're constantly in the news. The rest of us morons, we're spoon-fed little pieces of that. And we determine what we're going to consume. Some of us will consume weather 24/7. Some of us might consume interesting court cases. Some of us may consume interesting YouTube stories or crypto stories or any number of different kinds of stories. It's news. We look for facts. We don't look for opinion. And if we want opinion, well, we go elsewhere and we get the opinion on something. But you're promoting your news stories as you're promoting your opinions as news stories. And that is what they're talking about. You're not printing the truth. You're printing what you want the truth to be and ignoring things that are the truth and then claim blind ignorance over it. Go ahead, Malcolm, because you've completely lost your crowd.
And it's a crippling failure because they never really grasped and told us what they were talking about.
Oh, because they never told us what they were talking about people like you, Malcolm. They were talking about people like you that are more concerned about, white men the way that it used to be. And you're not concerned with just giving us the news. Don't care what color you are. It's not how I choose where I get my news from. I don't care what gender you are. That's not how I decide where I get my news from. I try to get my news from people that I trust are telling me the truth. And even if they are telling me the truth, sometimes I'll go and double check and verify. Doesn't mean I always get it right then either. Sometimes where they got their story from was from somebody else. They got it from somebody else. They got it from somebody else. And somewhere along the way it got lost in translation. Or something was left out. Or something was horribly edited from the original story. You shouldn't trust everything that you read, everything that you see. I could be 10 feet tall. I could be 2 feet tall. Maybe I'm living in a little bitty tiny box and I'm only 3 inches tall. And everything around me is just cut to scale. Maybe I only exist whenever you turn on YouTube and you actually go to my channel. Maybe that's the only place that I actually exist. Maybe I'm just AI generated for your pleasure.
They were free to construct this mythological thing where all these people get together and set the agenda. There is no thing and there is no agenda. There are a variety of disparate voices and they have chosen to cherry pick and create this complete mythology.
It's so strange. It's so strange hearing you debate, Malcolm, because you listen to nothing that your opponents say. It's quite extraordinary. I've met it before, but never quite so badly as it...
Ouch. Nice.
As it occurs in you. You keep saying things that neither of us have said, and then you try to pathologize what we say. You decide to say things like, it's a conspiracy theory. If it comes from this side, it's a conspiracy theory. You say, we don't do our research. We're just conspiracy theorists. Apparently mild dose of it, he says, in his excellent medical-like analysis of his opponents. We just have a mild dose. No, Malcolm, why don't you listen to what comes out of our mouths and try to learn something from it, as I am with you this evening? But at the moment, all I get is you dismissing every single story we come up with, every egregious failure of the mainstream media, I've given you a definition of what I think of as the mainstream media, so your attempt to claim that we haven't answered it yet is just another straw man in your massive legion of straw men you keep creating this evening.
God bless Douglas. Just laying into him. He looks that you're just crushing him. Stop crushing the little man. Douglas, stop crushing him.
Evening. But I beg you to actually consider the fact that what we are describing is, even if you think not as accurate as you would like, an expression of a problem that is going on in our societies. Functioning liberal democracies need to have trust in their media. And the best that your side has been able to come up with so far tonight is to say, we get things wrong quite often, but you should trust us.
Damn.
So where do we find trust, Matt? I mean, do we find trust?
Wonder
in
why
Substack?
everything seemed a little dark.
I'm generally curious about that. Where, if it's not mainstream media, which we traditionally have turned to, for better or worse, to seek out facts.
And this moderator is just saving Malcolm's ass on this left and right, because Malcolm just got spanked. Like, badly. Really badly. I feel for Malcolm.
That are widely understood to be true, then where does that truth factory now exist? Or does it not exist at all?
It doesn't come from an institution. The only way, there's no shortcut to trust in media. The only way to get it is by doing a good job over and over and over again, not getting things wrong, and when you do get things wrong, admitting it. There's no other way to do it in media. And the mainstream media, what we're talking about tonight, has repeatedly gotten things wrong, not admitted it, not owned up to it. I mean, Malcolm is talking about conspiracy theories. Let's talk about a story that was huge in America for years. This idea that Donald Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, was making visits to Prague. Now, this came from the infamous Steele dossier. If you read the dossier, basically the idea is Trump sent his lawyer to go meet with hackers and Kremlin representatives in Prague. And Steele says that they would preferably be Romanian hackers who would afterwards retreat to Bulgaria, where they could use that country as a bolt hole to lie low. If that's not a conspiracy theory, I don't know what is. This story was taken seriously by every major news organization in America for years on end with no evidence. And he accuses us of being conspiracy theorists. It's preposterous.
Let's, just in our remaining
That
time
is
here,
not the
before we
way
get to
you
closing
do
statements,
news.
The other part I want to touch on for the benefit of this audience is power and the powerful, and how media either holds these to account or not. And I think, Michelle and Malcolm, people would observe today that there are an awful lot of billionaires that now own large chunks of mainstream media. Jeff?
Oh, you have no idea how this is going to get a little weird here for Malcolm, but he's got an explanation. I am sure that he is going to ignore the question, and he's going to try to retort everything that either Matt Taibbi said or Douglas Murray said, because he is furiously writing in his notebook, I've got to make a point, I've got to make a point, I've got to make a point, I've got to make a point. I'll get to your point, but I've got a counter argument to this. I know I have got a counter argument to this.
Bezos at the Washington Post, the Hunt family, the Boston Globe, Rupert Murdoch, the whole swath of
Elon Musk, Twitter.
Properties. Mr. Buffett, I understand, owns 30 newspapers in America. Do you guys acknowledge, or do you fear, are you concerned about the extent to which mainstream media now is a plaything of some very powerful corporate interests that may not have the interests of citizens or their democracy at heart?
This is how I get my paycheck.
I mean, I think that that's obviously true. I mean, right? And I think that that's inarguable. I would be surprised if there was any difference of opinion between us on that. I don't think that that's something, I mean, it's something that is new in terms of the scale of the wealth because, you know, we live in an age of ever
if I can
escalating
find a better place for my
inequality,
microphone
but it's
that
not a new
makes it
thing
still
that very
sound
rich
good.
people have controlled the press. That's been true for as long as there has been a press in this country. I do think, however, that when you asked before about how you restore trust, and again, I know I keep saying this, I apologize if this is not totally relevant to the Canadian context where you have, you know, kind of media organizations funded by the government. In the United States, where you don't have that, except for things like Voice of America and NPR, one of the biggest crises in terms of trust in the mainstream media, I believe, has sort of very little to do with ideology and much more to do with corporate consolidation. There's been an absolute decimation of local media, and that doesn't just kind of impoverish our view of what's going on in the country. It impoverishes the industry because that used to be the way that you came up in journalism. You started working at a local small town paper, you moved to a bigger one, you know, maybe you ended your career at somewhere like New York Times or the Boston Globe or the LA Times. But it gave people, my father's also a journalist. It gave people like my father, who didn't go to an Ivy League school. I mean, I didn't either, but who, you know, sort of wasn't a great
Hopefully
student,
that all
but
still
was
sounds
really into
good.
sports and was started out as a sports
Just trying to
reporter and
find a
then
more
became crime
comfortable
reporter.
spot for my
You had
microphone.
a non-elite path into the mainstream media. It was much more of a blue-collar profession because of the structure of it, because of the way you sort of learned the craft. And it also cultivated trust because you could see for yourself if the world that the newspaper or the local news was describing was the world that you saw. You know, you would see people you knew, things that were happening in their community reflected in the newspaper. And so you would be able to develop a kind of different relationship. You knew journalists, you saw journalists in your community. That has been decimated, but that is not a story of left-wing ideological capture. That is a story of kind of amok capitalism and plutocracy.
Thanks, Michelle. Well said. So a similar question for you guys, which is, there's another billionaire out there who's got his hands on a media platform. His name is Elon Musk, and it's called Twitter. So, I mean, don't we need the mainstream media even more in the face of Elon Musk's Twitter 2.0?
Well, no. I mean, the issue with Twitter is about whether or not there are hands secretly on the levers behind the algorithms. And the problem with Twitter as a platform in recent years, as I think everybody who studied it knows, is that there has been a prioritization of certain accounts, shadow banning, all sorts of stuff that Twitter pretended it wasn't doing and then admitted that it was. And, of course, the usual political bias. Now, you can see the political bias in the people who are coming back on Twitter since Elon Musk took it over. There are no cancelled left-wing accounts coming back on because mostly it wasn't left-wing accounts that were being cancelled. It was right-wing ones, conservative ones, including ones I have no taste for or appetite for. But the fact is that there was a shadow game going on at Twitter. And we will discover in the coming weeks, as Elon makes the discoveries clearer, we will discover exactly what that looked like, how behind the scenes Twitter was able to lean to subdue certain accounts, certain stories, how it was able to promote other ones. But that's if I can say so, a slightly separate question to this one. Hopefully Twitter and other social media companies would simply allow a flourishing of the media so that everyone can have their say. It would not be something, for instance, which decided that if a conservative newspaper drops a very big story before an election, you lock that newspaper out of its account for weeks on end.
Ouch.
Okay.
Ouch.
Okay, let's go to closing statements. We're going to take these in the opposite order.
I want to see these closing statements.
The opening. 3 minutes on the clock for each of you. I'm going to leave the stage, and Malcolm, pass it over to you to kick us off for the closing statements.
There you go.
Here's what I think the debate boils down to, and that is that.
Oh boy, here we go. Let's see. So Malcolm's going to go. I think he could go next, but he may pass it over to Matt. Then Michelle will go. She's really thinking deep about this. And then one of these two guys will go. So this is going to be interesting in this part right here, because Malcolm's about to get destroyed. And you notice that Douglas is paying very close attention to what Malcolm has to say.
Our opponents believe that the mainstream media they're concerned that the mainstream media, to the extent that they have told us what it is filled with people who don't think like they do, and that fact makes them uncomfortable. And in support of this, they have given us a long list of rather predictable hot button topics taken from their Twitter feed. And my question was, what would make them happy? So what would restore the trust of Matt and Doug in the mainstream media?
Repeat after me, Malcolm. Report the truth. It's really straightforward. Report the truth. If you don't know the truth, not what you want to be true, but what the truth is, if you don't know what that is, Douglas, then don't report it. Don't have a narrative. There should never be a narrative behind news. You shouldn't have to have a narrative for the story. The story should speak for itself. Sometimes the story is boring and uninteresting. That's all that people want, is news that's true. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah. And I think with Matt, the answer is obvious. He would like, it was...
And he's going to go there yet again.
The world resembled 1955 again.
He thinks he's funny. I mean, he literally thinks that he's funny, and he's not. There's no humor in it. And these people agree there's no humor in it. I mean, yeah, you'll get a couple of chuckles, but this is why you should be disgusted with someone like Malcolm.
That would fill him with joy. Doug would like more stories on the Hunter Biden laptop.
4 times they're going to play the race
but more
card?
seriously,
Really?
I think that they would be happier if they felt that the composition of prestigious journalistic institutions more closely reflected the full range of ideological attitudes in the American public. That is actually a serious proposition. I don't mean to make light of it at all.
You've been making light of it the whole time.
But it is one that makes me a little uncomfortable, because I don't think that you can ultimately say that trust in institutions is reserved solely for institutions that perfectly match the characteristics of the general population. It's like saying that we don't trust kindergarten teachers because kindergarten teachers are overrepresented with people who have an enormous amount of patience for temper tantrums of 4-year-olds. I mean, they are an extraordinary and very specific subgroup of the population that performs very well in that particular task. More generally, though, when we say of journalists, that I don't think we should be judging the quality and trustworthiness of journalists.
Yes, you should. You should be judging the quality because you want to know that the truth is true. This guy is a moron of the highest degree.
By the composition of that group or by their private ideological positions. I believe that in a liberal society, that we have to believe that the people who compose our professions can place their professional obligations above their personal ideological positions.
You would like to think that they could, but obviously, like you, Malcolm, you can't.
And if you don't believe we are capable of that act of transformation, then you can't have trust in any of the institutions that
This is what he's saying.
make up liberal society.
This is what he's saying.
Thank you for that closing statement, Malcolm. We're now going to go to Douglas. Same opportunity, 3 minutes on the clock.
Well, Munk, I'm going to try to take this more seriously than you did in your endless creation of straw men, which just is ceaseless this evening, and address what I think is the real problem we have in our century in terms of information technology. Having different opinions is so 20th century. This century we have different facts, and it's lethal. It's absolutely lethal for the functioning of society.
Ouch.
And if you want to see how lethal it is, look at the situation in America, where not just the media, but every institution, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the Supreme Court, every institution, you decide whether it's for your side or not. It's disastrous for society, but it starts with the facts. And when the facts go wrong, or you become glib about them, or decide that it's just the facts that will suit your side, or pretend you're playing a game of honesty and are not actually playing a game of honesty, everything else in the society can go to hell. This side has not been saying any of these straw men that you've been so kindly creating this evening, Malcolm. We've been saying that the mainstream media cannot be trusted. That is all. We're not saying don't read it. I repeat, we're not saying don't absorb it. Of course, you'd be an idiot to say that. What, you think we're only going to read Substacks for the rest of life? There's not even time. But the mainstream media is currently failing. It is failing you, the public. It is failing its employees. It's failing at its central task. You quoted one example of what journalism was meant to consist of. I would quote another, what George Orwell said. It's out on his statue outside the BBC. Sadly, the employees do not read it every morning before going in. But George Orwell famously said that the job of a journalist was to tell people facts they don't want to hear. The problem we have in our century coming up is that people will be paying for and absorbing only the facts they want to hear. The argument we are making is one of hygiene, basic hygiene in the media, in the mainstream media. I don't want to blow it up. I don't want an end to it or anything like it. I spent a significant amount of my life in the mainstream media. We just want it to be honest. We just want it to be factual. We don't want it to chase its own prejudices. We just want it to speak truth, whatever that is. That's not so radical.
No, it's not. Hear, hear. Kudos. Kudos. Could not have put it better.
Douglas. Michelle, thank you for an excellent debate. Let's have your closing remarks, please.
Me? Oh, yeah. This is going to be interesting with her. If it shows her performance.
Okay. So I think that I don't necessarily disagree with Douglas that this kind of constant hygiene is necessary.
Because you can't. There is no disagreement there.
That journalists need to, I don't even know if objectivity is the right frame, but there does need to be a sort of a constant conversation, institutional constraints, as well as, kind of a certain professional pride.
Michelle, stop with the word salad.
In being able to distinguish between what you hope is true and what you actually find. The argument that I want to make is that it is only the mainstream media that sort of has that ethos.
Really? Prove it. Prove it there, sweet cheeks. Prove it.
If you read conservative media, you
I can see where she's going to go in short span. If you read conservative media, you only observe conservative ideologies. If you read liberal media, you only take in liberal. Maybe we should be taking in more sides. Take it all in. Because somewhere in the middle is the truth.
will not often find, occasionally you will, but I think in general, you will not often find a lot of stuff that conservatives don't want to hear.
See, she's losing already. She's losing already.
I mean, likewise, if you read a blog devoted to the various, kind of failings of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, or whatever, they're not going to suddenly say, oh, I thought they got that story wrong, but when I looked at it again, they really got it right. I know from being in newsrooms, from being around journalists.
Because that's where she gets her news from, obviously, folks. Let's hear it from Michelle. She gets passed around the newsroom.
That there is a hunger out there to find
the next greatest story that's going to make it to the top. You're going to get front page with this one. You go, girl.
Counterintuitive story, to find the unusual story. Very recently, the New York Times did a big piece on puberty blockers.
In a debate, telling these little short stories does not do well. You're not a good storyteller, Michelle. You should give this up.
That made a lot of our readers extremely angry. The piece was about, that these are kind of given to kids who either, kind of are transgender or believe.
Woman. See, you're bringing up something that is not a good topic, especially with someone like Douglas Murray right there that could lay into you 9 times to Sunday and tell you how wrong you are.
Believe that they're transgender to pause puberty, and then later on, if they decide to kind of continue with their transition, they can start on cross-sex hormones.
Which has been proven to be wrong.
And the piece featured 3 children. One of them was a trans girl who from a very early
Say it. A boy.
age had identified as female, who went on puberty
It was a boy.
blockers, later started estrogen, was very glad, she and her family were very glad
He.
not to have to go, that she hadn't had to go through a male
He.
puberty, and this was clearly the right thing for her.
He.
There was another young woman who had kind of her doubts about her gender coincided with other psychological troubles, and she had started puberty blockers and then started testosterone,
A she.
but later
A she.
decided that she wasn't actually
She.
male, and that this had been kind of a grievous mistake, and
She.
that she feels like the process had been too rushed.
Was born a she. Turned into a he. And went back to being a she. Was always a she. Even whenever they attempted to change what they're being identified as into a he. I got nothing against transvestites. I actually used to work with a bunch of transvestites. they're all pretty cool. Workplace, whatever, don't care. You do your thing, I do mine. Run into them out on the street somewhere. Be like, hey, how's it going? Talk about work. Whatever, didn't care. Doesn't matter to me. But these men never made any qualms about that they were still men. Whether they were post-op, pre-op, they'd let you know. That's how they identified. They always considered themselves men. They were just transvestites. And they were absolutely happy to be called transvestites. They also didn't mind being called she. But if they weren't dressed up and dolled up and you saw them in their true form, you'd be surprised. Not that I ever did. Just saying. They always would tell you, I'm still a man. Nothing's going to change that. No matter what I call myself, I'm always going to be a man. And, you know, I just was born in the wrong body. No amount of surgery is going to change that. And they would know that.
There was a third child who developed significant bone density issues and ended up going off puberty blockers for those reasons. And now
Let's give Michelle 1 moment to finish.
Yeah, because she ran out of time with her little rambling story.
Oh, sorry, I don't understand what I just want to say very quickly, who else has an incentive to do a story about all the complications and the things that we don't know?
Thank
Yeah, she spit out word salad. The reason those people started clapping is they would have a timer for the amount of time that they were allowed to speak. And she made no point whatsoever before. She didn't even complete her story before everyone started clapping. That's why she was confused, because she didn't play by the rules of the debate. But it's not uncommon for women like this to feel like they should be treated like something special. So she's, so far, taken up more time than everybody else.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. We're going to give the last word in this debate to Matt Taibbi. Matt, take us home.
Now let's hear what a good storyteller has to say. I'm not a good storyteller. I tend to ramble.
First of all, just quickly, the notion that the New York Times should be patted on the back for doing this story like the Hunter Biden story years late, after all the people who had touched that subject were ostracized and in some cases actually thrown out of the mainstream media. They're working on podcasts now as opposed to working for big magazines like they had before.
There you go.
This is Douglas was writing about this years ago.
So was I. I first wrote about this for the New Yorker in 2014.
Not the New York Times.
Yeah, anyway, it's
Yeah,
like
there
I
you
think
go.
It's a little
It's not the
odd
New
to
York
give yourself
Times.
credit for a story
I
that's
didn't write it. I'm not giving myself credit.
All right, fine. Look, tonight we talked a lot about whether or not you should trust the mainstream media, but for the business, there's a more urgent question, which is, do people trust the mainstream media? And we already have an answer. This is the headline from a recent Gallup Trusted Media survey. Americans' trust in media remains
Here it comes.
near record low. Washington, D.C. Dateline. At 34%, Americans trust in mass media to report the news, quote, fully, accurately, and fairly, is essentially unchanged from last year and just 2 points higher than the lowest that Gallup has recorded in 2016. during the presidential campaign. Just 7% of Americans have a great deal of trust and confidence in media.
No. Ouch.
And 27% have a fair amount. Meanwhile, 28% of US adults say they do not have much confidence, and 38% have none at all in newspapers, TV, and radio. Notably, this is the first time that the percentage of Americans with no trust at all in media is higher than the percentage with a great deal or a fair amount combined. So, whatever the reason, mainstream media has an enormous trust problem. And it's doing an ostrich act. It's pretending it's not happening. It's pretending that it's somebody else's fault.
Yep.
When you're a writer, when you're a journalist, and people don't trust you, it's always your fault. It's always a communication problem.
There you go.
Back, I remember covering the 2016 presidential campaign. The news media couldn't have gotten that story more wrong for longer. First, every single data journalist said with absolute certainty that Donald Trump would never be the Republican nominee. Nate Silver from 538.com said that Donald Trump would play in the NBA before he'd be the Republican nominee.
Ouch.
Then they gave him no chance to win the general election. And after that happened, they should have looked inside and said, what did we get wrong? How did we miss this? Well, you missed it because you're living in a bubble and you're no longer in contact with the rest of America. And that's the problem with the media today.
Thank you, Matt.
Ouch. Ouch. Well put, Matt. Well put.
Thank you for those closing statements.
Kudos.
Now we're now getting an opportunity to vote on a second time on our motion today. So pull out your smartphones. Debaters are not allowed. And you're going to text the word Munk, M-U-N-K, to 37607 if you're not already registered with our poll system. There's also a QR code in your program. You can scan the QR code and activate the second vote on our audience motion tonight. Be it resolved, do not trust the mainstream media.
What do you think? You think that they will show that it's still the same? The belief in it is still the same? Or do you think that all of that has changed?
Let that vote build. Let's just quickly review where we started out tonight's debate. It was pretty much a split opinion. If those numbers held, they may have counted a few more votes over the intervening period of time, but I believe it was 52-48. Let's see if we can get the first audience vote back up on the screen. Give our techs here a second.
Let all the tally come in.
There we go. 48 in favor, 52 opposed. We then asked you how many could change your mind if you were so inclined, depending on what you heard over the last few minutes. 82% said yes, you could change your mind. 18% no. So public opinion was fluid, in play. So let's see what happened over the last 90 minutes. Did either team of these debaters swing opinion one way or another? We're going to have the pre-audience vote up on the screen, and then we will show the new vote. There we go.
Ooh.
67% in favor of the...
That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is what they call a massive change in their perception. Be it resolved, don't trust mainstream media. 67% people changed.
The motion, 33% opposed.
Yeah, Malcolm,
That's
you
what
just
I
got
like to
your ass
see.
handed to you.
So, a nice swing in opinion yet again. That's what we like at the Munk debates. People's minds, views, opinions changed by what they heard. It's an important feature of this series, and again, it would not be possible without the Peter and Melanie Munk Foundation and all of our generous members here tonight.
And I'd like to say, anybody, go and check out any of the other Munk debates that are out there. They're very interesting. If you enjoy this kind of content, they will constantly have these kinds of debates with probably some of the people that you watch regularly on YouTube. I would never do well in a debate. I can't find all my words sometimes. This is why I don't debate. I forget things. It's a slight issue up there. It doesn't always fire on all cylinders.
So let me just close by saying, terrific to have Roy Thompson Hall filled to the brim for this debate. Please come back in the spring. The 29th debate, we'll do it right here on this stage with you. Thanks again for coming out tonight. Good night.
All right. Well, that part is over. Ooh. So, put your thoughts down in the comments section if you found this interesting. If you didn't find it interesting, don't post anything in the comments section. Or post it in the comment section and say it was an absolute bore. I couldn't hear your microphone half the time. I thought I was watching a easy listening jazz station. Whatever it might be. Go ahead and put it in there, seriously. I'm hoping that my mic is working better. I've relocated it. It was sitting probably about, I don't know, close to 2.5, 3 feet away from me. So I would have to talk very loud. So I'm hoping that this clears that up a little bit. Doesn't sound like it's too muddy or anything. I'll probably go back at some point and actually check and see how it sounded. It's a little hard for me to judge. Sometimes the hearing isn't as great as it used to be. You know, that's from many, many years of not wearing earplugs and playing very loud venues. So the hearing isn't always that great. Plus alcohol doesn't always help out with the hearing. It's a little weird. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up another document that I've got here. And I'm going to actually end this broadcast, and I'm going to see if I can do that from here. See if I can get this up. What I'm going to do is I can see if I can start another broadcast, and this is going to be a little different. If I'm able to do this, I will kick it over to that broadcast, so you're welcome to come join me over there, and it will be its own particular stream. I've never done this before, so bear with me. We will make this happen here. And we're going to do a live stream on this one. I don't know how long I'm going to go on this, but hopefully it goes really good. And bear with me. What I want to do is I'm going to take a slight break, but I will be right back, and then I will kick that link over there, sort of trying to make sure that this kind of stuff works. So just bear with me on this. Also, enjoy my tiger. All right, so I am back. So what I've managed to do is I've created another stream. I'm going to see if I can kick this thing over there, so this way it shows up a little bit differently. And you're welcome to join me over there if it works. If there's anybody here, which looks like there's no viewers at this current time, which is absolutely fine, because I thought it would be a good recording to have, and I really enjoyed those Munk debates. I hope that you did also. But in the meantime, I am going to end this stream. If I'm able to do it. I don't know. Maybe I'm not able to do it. Somebody else will have to teach me how to do that. But what I'll do is I will start this next stream here shortly. But for this part of the night, this one is over. Thank you. Peace.
Exótica.